Good afternoon. I hope you all enjoyed your lunch and are ready and excited to get it on. I know I am. So thank you and welcome back. I hope you had the opportunity to visit with our sponsors and encourage the students in the hackathon, as well as network with one another. I hope you're all getting each other's LinkedIn profiles and contacts and all that stuff. I also hope you're sharing your experiences on social media. So without further ado, we must get to it. Our next panel discussion is troubleshooting the diversity dilemma. Once again, we will be joined by a panel of experts who will offer their insight on the true complexion of Silicon Valley. It is my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Megan Rose Dickey, a reporter at TechCrunch, whose focus centers on diversity, inclusion, belonging, and social impact in the tech industry. Please welcome Megan Rose Dickey.
Thank you, Marianne, and thank you, Black Enterprise, for inviting me. Excited to be here. It's certainly and unfortunately evident that the lack of diversity and inclusion remains a constant and real problem. But attention to this problem has increased over the last several years. Our panel of experts have come together to discuss how far Silicon Valley and the tech industry as a whole has come in boosting diversity efforts. So let's meet our panel. First up is Brian Tippens, Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer of HP Enterprise. Brian is responsible for a wide range of company-wide programs and initiatives that support, drive, and influence Hewlett-Packard Enterprise's diversity philosophy, strategy, goals, customer relationships, and business results. In partnership with HPE business leaders and employees across the world, Brian and his team focus on ensuring that HPE continues to lead in creating and maintaining a diverse and inclusive work environment, aligned with the new style of work, while expanding employee engagement and involvement at all levels. Please welcome Brian Tippens. Of course. Next, I am pleased to introduce Howard Wright, Vice President of the Platform Engineering Group, Director of Business Development, Communication and Devices Group at Intel Corporation. Howard is responsible for fostering effective and impactful relationships between Intel and key global partners across the wireless ecosystem, including device OEMs, infrastructure OEMs, and mobile network operators. Please welcome Howard Wright. Rounding out our panel is Gail Johnson, Vice President, Leadership Development and Diversity Initiatives at AT&T. Gail manages a team of talent management professionals responsible for the company's Future Leaders internship experience, leadership development, and business sales leadership programs. Her organization also oversees diversity initiatives that help build AT&T's diverse talent pipeline. These efforts include relationships with HBCUs, minority-serving institutions, and diverse stakeholders. Join me in welcoming Gail Johnson. Let's go. All right, thanks for joining me here today. I'm excited for our conversation. So let's see, within the last week, we saw some pretty big news around diversity and inclusion. The US Department of Labor is actually suing Palantir over racial discrimination. So Gail, let's kick this off with you. What is AT&T doing to ensure fair hiring process and non-discriminatory one at that?
Well, it's interesting that you said within the last week what was in the news. I thought you were going to say within the last week you heard the news about our chairman and what he had to say about diversity and inclusion. It still brings chills to my spine when I think about that day that the chairman of our company stood up before over 2,000 people and talked about diversity and inclusion in a way that was so authentic, so real, and he spoke from the heart. And so I encourage, let me see by a show of hand, how many of you all heard the statements that Randall Stephenson said relative to diversity and inclusion? So for the hands who are not up, he talked directly about, specifically about Black Lives Matters. And he talked specifically about why it's not okay when someone says Black Lives Matter to say every life matters. He talked about how to move from being tolerant to truly understanding another perspective. He used the example of someone saying, I love my son, and the response is, what about your daughter? Or I'm going to do the breast cancer walk, and the response is, what about prostate cancer? And so AT&T, from the top, believes in diversity and inclusion, and it is woven into the fabric of everything that we do, including our hiring practices.
Got it. And let's see, Brian, what about you with HP?
You know, I'd echo those comments. It's just so important that the tone be set at the top. And I know it's kind of trite, we hear that all the time, but it's never been more true than when talking about diversity in tech, because our industry is not as diverse as it could be. And those companies with leaders such as Randall that step out really kind of pave the way. I give props to Brian Krzanich at Intel as well, who did such a great job of throwing down the gauntlet, making that parity promise, but also putting the dollars behind it.
Right.
Our company, same way, you know, the tone is very much set at the top. You may know that HP, 75-year-old company in the Valley, had the opportunity last year to split into two net new publicly traded companies, the biggest separation in tech history, if not in corporate America history, creating two net new publicly traded companies, and that gave us the opportunity to build two new boards of directors, and we set out from the outset to make those two of the most diverse boards in tech very deliberately so.
Yeah, and
very
which
successful in
they
doing that.
are, actually.
They were collectively between the two boards, 4 African Americans, 1 Hispanic, 12 women. The numbers are quite impressive. Didn't happen organically, but just to say, to echo Gail's statements, the tone really has to get set at the top in order for progress to be made.
Yeah, so I definitely want to circle back to talking about board of directors, but just what you both said was that, you know, it needs to start at the top. And I know at Intel, Brian Krzanich has publicly declared that, you know, the company really cares about diversity and inclusion, but he's also said that the company has received, or the leadership team has received, threats from employees because they're not on board the whole diversity and inclusion train. So how do you get that to trickle down throughout the company?
You don't piece it off in a small part of a small building that's in HR. Diversity and inclusion for us really is part of the cognitive tissue, which is now Intel. As you'll think about things that are connected, that are smart, and servers, and process node technology, you'll also think of diversity and inclusion. His commitment is one of the reasons that I joined the company. When I was getting recruited from a couple companies here in the Valley, I was lucky enough to meet with BK and our head of HR. They said, make sure that you watch the CES, his keynote. Is 2015 now. After 45 minutes of fantastic technology and demo, what he spent the last 15 minutes on was a $300 million commitment to diversity and inclusion, which would follow up immediately thereby with a $125 million commitment from our ICAP, our Intel Capital. Our commitment to the supply chain diversity and our commitment to conflict-free products that we use in our day-to-day life. That, to me, signaled I wanted to be on the right side of history and use whatever podium or whatever voice I have to make a difference for my 2 daughters, And that's why maybe I appreciated what BK did, because he has 2 daughters also.
But why do you think that other employees at the company might not really appreciate what he's doing?
Because revolution is difficult, and it is not always welcome. These adult conversations that we have to have, I'd rather have them in these forums and open forums with colleagues that don't look like me or don't have the same experiences as I do, but they need to be had. The more that we, sequester ourselves into our groups, the less progress will eventually be made. So there are still wonderful Confederate soldiers that live all throughout Silicon Valley, and the only way to make progress with them is to have an adult conversation and let them know that there is no license to kill middle-aged white men, nor are we lowering the bar at Intel for anybody. We're not lowering the bar, we're increasing the expectations from all of our engineers and all of our employees to be more responsible, to be more diverse, to be more inclusive.
Because I'm committed to excellence, and I see the sound guys worried in the back. I think your coat is rubbing against your microphone a little bit.
Thank you for your commitment.
All right.
So, Brian, you mentioned earlier that let's see, HP has between HP and HP Enterprises, 2 of the most diverse boards in Silicon Valley. That includes 5 women, 2 black people. One is a black woman, which is awesome. 2 black women.
Yeah.
How did you achieve that?
Yeah, it was not easy, I think is the summary. It was not easy and took very deliberate action. So if you've had an opportunity to build a corporate board before, you know that typically they're filled with homogenous slates of people who don't look like us, right? The typical pedigree of a board member for a Fortune 500 company is a former CEO or former CFO. And if you look at the numbers, typically Caucasian males over the age of 50, over the age of 60 in most cases. And so when we set out to build our 2 new boards, we said we wanted to lead with diversity on all counts because it was the right business thing to do. It was diversity in gender, diversity in ethnicity, diversity in experience, not just a bunch of people out of tech. Maybe we wanted someone from the retail sector because we sell into consumer spaces, diversity in terms of age. And it took a push all along the way. We work with the search firm, as corporations typically do. I get excited about this stuff. We worked with the search firm and told them diversity, and here's what we're looking for. And the search firm was an awesome partner, but they kept coming back with more and more homogenous slates. So we had to keep saying, well, where are the women? Where are the Hispanics? Where are the African Americans? It took a push all along the way. It took my CEO and head of HR sort of lying on the railroad tracks to stop the train from rushing down the railroad tracks. But we were wildly successful. We ended up with 4 African Americans in total, including one who I hope you all know well, 30-something-ish African American female, Stacy Brown Philpott, CEO at TaskRabbit, and that doesn't happen. You don't see 30-something of any racial background as board members for a Fortune 50 company. So I think a lesson from that was that, we all intellectually know this is important. No one will say, I don't like diversity. I don't want to do that diversity stuff.
Right.
You do hear it.
Well, maybe so.
You do hear it.
It's a little bit more subtle. It's a little bit more subtle.
Probably not here.
Subtle.
Yeah.
I think that the aha moment for a lot of our leaders who hadn't been on this journey with us is that it doesn't happen organically, and it takes a push. And so we're very proud of where we ended up, but know we've got more work to do.
Right. You mentioned that you worked with a search firm, so like a recruiting firm.
Yes.
Which firm was that, and would you recommend them for?
Well, I'll say it because it's in the public domain and we've spoken about it. Great firm, Heidrick & Struggles. They've been a wonderful partner for us and have a diversity focus. But they will admit to you as well, they're learning along the way as they're learning with us. And so I think another key learning is you must push your firms to think in this direction, because otherwise they're going to do the same thing, come up with those homogenous slates, or let the nominating committee of the board call the people who they know or played golf with or went to Stanford with together without asking for it and indeed demanding it. It's not going to come naturally.
Absolutely.
Right.
I'd actually like to piggyback on that, because I'm speaking to the 30-something-year-olds in the audience, the 20-something-year-olds in the audience, that board seats should be an aspirational goal for all of us. And so knowing those people who can make those types of appointments is very key. So the places that you go, the nonprofit boards that you agree or not agree to sit on, the volunteer work that you do on the community is what gets you recognized and what gets you appointed to a paying corporate board. And so having your name out there so that people know you, it's always interesting to me that when people know people, but nobody knows them, you know, so you can drop a name, but nobody can drop your name. Be in a place and space where someone is dropping your name for a board seat. And a lot of the skill sets that you bring are exactly what a board is looking for. They always need someone with a financial background to be on their audit committee. They need someone with an HR background to be on their HR search committees. They need someone with the IT background. Cybersecurity is huge now, so a lot of boards are looking for people with cybersecurity expertise to be on their board with all of the cyber threats and the leaks that we've seen in the years in the banking industry in particular. So we at AT&T are very proud of our board. We have 2 African Americans on our board, and our chief board of directors is an African American woman, Joyce Roche. So very, very proud of that. But it comes because corporations have to be very intentional about how they go about finding talent to be on their board, which is no different than being intentional about finding talent that can be in an internship. You have to go where the talent is. So if you sit back and say we can't find anyone other than this slate of, you know, Caucasian males to be on your board, and we accept that, then you will keep getting what you've always gotten. But if you become very intentional about going to where the talent is and waiting for that talent, they'll be out there. But my coaching to the young 30-year-olds out there, the young 20-year-olds out there, be seen, be visible, be at the top of mind for a board seat.
Howard, why do you think that that just so many companies in the tech industry have or seem to have a hard time filling up diverse boards of directors?
So I think it's again, it's a lack of being intentional. It's something that you really have to want to go after. My colleague here, Kaylee Gagnon, wave Kaylee, she's in our talent acquisition, our staffing organization. I'm in talent management. We're tied at the hip. I mean, there's no difference, there's no line between talent acquisition and then talent development. But we have to be very coordinated and very deliberate about going out and finding that talent. So she and I talk every single week. It's not, you know, just something that just happens. It's not something that's just by osmosis, great diverse talent is going to walk in and say, I want to be on your board. You have to be very intentional about going out and getting it.
Right. Howard, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, we're walking the walk and talking the talk. As Brian mentioned earlier, from the top down, this is a commitment for years and years to come, not just for the next few minutes while it's topical. Our executives, we expanded our board, have 2 women now, and are in constant search for other females in URMs. Our senior management is now more diverse than it's ever been, and it's in our 48-year lifetime. And we think about it in terms of recruiting, progression, retention, and development. All 4 of those pillars are needed to keep, sustain, and develop the best talent. Because the best talent, much of that's probably sitting in this room, can sit in their same house, townhouse, or condo and have the choice of any of these wonderful companies in the Valley. So we're trying to create a very inclusive environment that taps into a certain potential that is not just limited by the headline of the moment. We're here for the long term. The idea is we want to change, you know, the face of wireless in many ways. What we're doing in our technology, and then we're trying to help change the faces of wireless also.
So we've talked about, you know, the process of finding diverse people and recruiting them. There are at least a handful of startups that are working on recruiting. There's Blendor, and then there's Jopwell, and a couple of other ones. How effective do you think those companies are? And I'm curious if any of you have experience actually using any of those startups to find diverse talent. Brian?
Sure, I'll go first. Thank you for putting me on the spot because I have because
What I'm here for.
because I haven't yet used any of those firms, but have spoken to many of them, and they're on our roadmap to engage. Because we're a hiring engine. We're a massive global company that hires little tens of thousands of employees every year, many of them here domestically. I think one key takeaway is that it's important to know where those firms fit in your mission, right? Because most of us hire in many different levels and many different levels of experience and for many different roles. Much of the focus right now on the perceived or the real lack of diversity in tech is around core technology roles,
Right.
which I think is very important. However, we must go further. There's a bit of a hypothesis that if we taught every black and brown person how to code, we'd solve this problem, right? But we'd solve all the world's ills. And that's critically important, but we also need to hire people in finance and legal and HR and other areas of the company. And so these firms, particularly if they play a role in a niche space, can be very valuable.
Okay.
I think very similar response. I mean, we have used firms, we've used startup firms in very specific niche types of situations, but I think it's also important to have a brand that attracts talent, and that talent will want to come to your company, whether they're found by a firm or they are a direct hire. And so we will definitely not shy away from using a high-tech, niche firm if we have a specific need. But we also pride ourselves on being out there in the community so that top talent will see us and will come directly to us. So direct sourcing is one of our key ways of finding talent.
Yeah, and that's part of our, kind of domestic as well as global outreach. Some of the things that we've done historically in the last couple of years include going to Oakland Unified School District, working specifically with 2 high schools there to build the pipeline. Many of the excuses that you'll hear is that we can't find them. And part of our job is to build the draft board and the pipeline so that we're building K through 12 solutions. And one of the promises that we make to the kids in Oakland is, if you do your job and are successful in college, there'll be an internship and a blue badge contract at Intel for you. So it is not just, it's kind of a coalition of the willing. We know we'll have a couple good ideas. We'll know Gail will have a couple more ideas. Brian will expand on that. And then we finally get the turbine spinning properly, then we hope to make ourselves obsolete years from now by having to demand that diversity and inclusion be at the center of everybody's perspectives.
So you mentioned that Intel is doing some work in Oakland. Let's see, Google recently announced that they're opening a computer science lab in Oakland for youth of color.
Yep.
But then at the same time, you see tech companies like Uber coming in, and people are very hesitant just for these tech companies to come into communities and maybe ruin them the way that they did to my precious San Francisco, born and raised. So how do you ensure, or let's see, what is the reception been like?
How do we do it right?
Yeah, how do you do it right?
So once we put the strategy on the whiteboard, it sounds pretty good. We won't know if we're doing it right until we get in the middle of it. We know for a fact that if we do not go to these schools, if we do not go to these 501c3s, if we do not go to Black Girls Code and NSBE and these other groups that we're providing the $300 million for, we know for a fact we will have missed a historical point in time that we'll never be able to recover from. So will we stumble along the way in Oakland? Probably, but we're going to get better every year. That's why it's a multi-year commitment there. And God willing, we'll be able to do that and expand it to other unified school districts also.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
So I'll add to that. And I just love the focus on the fact that it truly is a multi-year journey. And I don't know that all the pundits and those who are looking in really get that. The investments are massive. The scrutiny is significant. We're all working as fast as we can to fix it. It's going to take a lot of years to fix it, right? No matter how aggressively you hire, we're already beginning to see progress at all the companies that are now reporting in a way that they didn't report.
That's right.
A level of transparency that's just amazing now, because as we know as corporate folks, what gets measured gets done.
Absolutely.
But we have to acknowledge that it won't happen overnight. The focus on creating opportunities and visibility in these communities that haven't typically been part of the tech ecosystem is massively important, because those of you who live here know that Oakland is 35, 40 miles away from Palo Alto, but 1,000,000 miles away.
Yes.
East Palo Alto is right across the bridge, but 1,000,000 miles away when it comes to visibility and opportunity. And so those types of investments, if you can't see it, you can't be it. Creating that frame of reference for our young folks coming up that they can potentially go into this arena and one day be folks like all of you who are successful in tech is just critically important.
So this is like, yeah, definitely
thank
deserves
you.
a
I'll take
round
the
of
clap.
applause. Absolutely, absolutely. And this topic is definitely one of those edge of the seats, like, you get excited just talking about it, and you saw the excitement with us here. Because it gets back to that space and place of being very intentional and being in it for the long run. It can't be, you do something here, you put $2,500 there, and you walk off and feel good about yourself. But you need to be there. You need to be there for the long run and to continue to do partnerships like this very one here, Black Enterprise. AT&T is very proud that we were one of the first sponsors of the Black Enterprise Tech Connect Summit last year when it first came about. And we're back here this year, okay? And why are we here? Why are we here? We're not here just because, we have this beautiful view of the bay and, we got a nice trip to where are we, San Francisco? And the reason why I said that is, I leave here and I go to the National Black MBA Conference in New Orleans. Why? Why am I willing to jump on 2 planes in a week?
I have no idea.
I know, crazy, right? But it's all about that being in it, being visible, being a part of, and we're not going away, because we really want and really respect the talent that's out there. We started off last year with Black Enterprise. We bought 10 college students, and Black Enterprise bought another 20 to our Palo Alto foundry to tour our foundry. Today, we had 43 students, mostly from HBCUs, touring our foundry at Palo Alto. Okay? They had a wonderful welcome speech by Kathleen Larkin, one of our vice presidents here, and a closing speech by the Chief Diversity Officer of AT&T, Cent Marshall. Okay? So 40 college students, hear me, 40 college students, over 40, had the opportunity to hear from the Chief Diversity Officer of a major 10 company, up close and personal, like literally could touch her. And she stood there while they hugged and touched her, okay? That kind of exposure is what you can do with that, where that can take you, it's just, you can't just go in these communities and come out. You have to be in it, and you have to stay in it and show that commitment. And yes, you may not see, return on investment year 1, year 2, but, Kaylee and I look at the numbers, and we're like, oh, we can see all the work that we did last year with our HBCU initiatives. We saw it in the pipeline of talent that came into our summer internships this summer, and we're seeing it now as we're starting to recruit for summer interns 2017. It's real. It's real.
Nice. Brian, can you tell me about some of the diversity initiatives that you're maybe most excited about at HP?
So I think, a lot of the focus, it's a good segue, because we talk a lot about the beginning of the pipeline, the entry of the young folks, the millennials who are coming right out of university. And that's critically important to build those numbers and start those careers early. But we're also, I'm sure all of you are as well, equally focused on building the internal leadership pipeline for the folks that are inside the company. I mentioned it's all about transparency and numbers. What gets measured gets done. We all compare our numbers. I'm 2%, I'm 7%. Wherever you are, if all those folks sit at the bottom of the org chart, then we haven't done our job, right? And so we focused a lot on building a pipeline of future leaders, because having those leaders to serve as sort of aspirational figures has a really important impact on the community. And I'll give you an example. I call it the profit effect. The profit effect, after a guy by the name of Tony Profit, who, if you don't know him, Google Tony Profit. Tony Profit was with HP for many years and was our lone African-American senior vice president, the most senior individual of color inside the company. And he led a very critical part of the business. And there was not a lot of African-Americans between Tony and the rest of the population, but as long as Tony was there was this vision that we could be like Tony, right? It was very important to the community. Microsoft stole them away from us at some point over the years. And immediately there was sort of this, you heard this gasp from the community, what about Tony? What about that role model? He, by the way, was just named the first Chief Equality Officer at Salesforce, reporting directly to Mark Benioff. He's a guy who you should know. So all that to say, we have to be laser focused on creating the next Tony Prophet, the next senior leaders. Again, it's great to have good representation numbers, but it has to be at all levels of the company. And so we're proud of focus with organizations like the ELC, the Executive Leadership Council. If you're not familiar with ELC, you should be. It's the baddest brothers and sisters in corporate America. You literally have to be at a certain level inside the company, a certain proximity to the CEO to be a member of the ELC. But they focus a lot on mid-level management programs to help create that next generation of future leaders. That's one example. Black Data Processing Association has similar programs. ITSMF, the IT Senior Management Forum, is an organization of the top African Americans in the tech sector. And so all that to say, we focus on the pipeline and early, but I'm proud of the work that we're doing to create the next generation of future leaders higher up on the org chart.
What about overall inclusion efforts at HP and ensuring that people of color and women and LGBTQ people feel like they're in a welcome and safe environment?
That's another great question. I think that's a big part of the focus as well. Howard talked about 4 pillars of their program. I think we all have something very similar in our companies. We focus a lot on talent acquisition first, but second, creating this environment of inclusion. Once you've got those diverse populations in the door, it's all the things we focus on to make sure, to use HR speak, that you can bring the full power of your differences to work, right? And that's around things like employee resource groups. We've got over 130 chapters of employee resource groups around gender, around ethnicity, around sexual orientation, and veteran status. And I think everyone will agree that there has to be that focus on creating the environment once we get there. You'll want to go to a company where you feel like your career aspirations can be met and there's people who look like you. I know we suffer from, and I wouldn't be surprised if some of the other tech companies here do, not the hiring numbers. We're building a pipeline. It's the attrition. Once you get there, do we want to stay there? What are we doing to create this environment for all those sectors, not just individually? It's not just an African American or Hispanic problem, it's women, it's LGBT, and it's a very global focus as well. And so it's something we focus on quite a bit.
Same with AT&T. I mean, we have a slogan in AT&T, a saying that we truly believe in, which is all voices matter and all voices are heard within AT&T. So we truly embrace all of diversity. We have 12 ERGs representing over 112,000 employees who belong to one or more ERGs within the company. Our ERG conference sold out in 13 minutes, okay? Sold out completely in 13 minutes. If you tried to get in 15 minutes later, you're on the wait list. And we were voted by Diversity Inc. to be the #1 ERG group on the planet. Okay, they said in the United States, but our chief diversity officer said on the planet, okay? She said on the planet, so we're going with on the planet, okay? #1 ERG group as voted on by Diversity Inc. So clearly all dimensions of diversity is supported by AT&T because all voices matter. And that is where you get the collective goodness of the creativity within a company, is to ensure that everybody has a seat at the table. Everybody has a voice at the table. Everybody has input into the decisions that are made. Everybody, every voice matters at AT&T.
And so when we talk about inclusion efforts, I think it's also important to recognize that, in light of all of the examples of systemic racism, which has shown itself in police brutality and killings of unarmed Black people, how do we make sure, or how do you all make sure that, people of color at your respective companies are feeling supported, or are those conversations happening?
So we've been having town halls. We have them probably once a quarter now, and probably become more frequent. We just had one, was that last month, with the chief of police from San Jose, the chief of police from Santa Clara, president of the NAACP chapter, and another young lady from a 501c3. Those adult conversations with folks that don't look like you, that don't necessarily talk like you, that don't have the same pedigree or background as you, because we get, become prisoners of our own thoughts versus having the more pervasive conversation, which actually could influence someone else. That's part of our reasoning for diversity inclusion is group think. The group IQ is limited to a certain capacity. The more folks of different backgrounds, of different experiences that you bring in that room, in that C-suite, it is statistically proven by Fortune magazine, S&P 500, that the companies that embrace diversity inclusion have a better profit motive to do so because they traditionally create more opportunity and more shareholder value. That really, to me, diversity inclusion is not black or white, it's actually green.
Right.
And you focus on what the shareholder really wants,
right.
the group IQ will go up because more questions, more different, more provocative questions will be asked from different time zones and different vectors. And that will ultimately produce a better outcome for the shareholder. So it's having these conversations out in the open with different folks, and sometimes those could be uncomfortable conversations, but so what?
Right.
And when your chairman states that the conversation, the uncomfortable conversation starts with him, it definitely opens up the door for the conversation. Prior to making that wonderful speech to all of us, which went viral on YouTube, by the way, and he didn't make the speech for it to go viral. He didn't have the cameras rolling and the press there. You know, employees took that videotape and sent it out and made it viral. But prior to that, I mean, the chairman would have meetings with our chief diversity officer where the sole topic was diversity and inclusion, with the operative word being and. You can be a diverse company and still not have the conversation around, are we inclusive? And how do we measure that? And how do we know that? How do we inspect what we expect? If we say this is an inclusive company, what are the measures of success to ensure that every employee feels included? And so having those meetings where that is the only agenda item and being very deliberate around how we ensure that we are a diverse and inclusive company happens at AT&T on a regular basis. So it is something that can be achieved, and it is something that is happening.
Can I just one more point?
Yeah, and then
because I know we're way over time.
Yeah.
I just want to sneak one more thing. two more things. There was a very tweetable moment from Howard a few minutes ago. It's not about brown or black, it's about green. Be sure you tweet that. Also, just a quick show of hands, how many of you are actually from the Valley? So I appreciate Black Enterprise taking the initiative to bring all of us here, because it's important to understand as we're talking about the value of networks and reaching out, the Valley is a different place. The business is done a little bit different. People speak a little bit different. It's a little bit cliquey. When you first meet somebody in the Valley, they're trying to figure out who you know and what circles you sort of run in. And so we've got all these conventional issues of inclusion and diversity that are common to all companies and industries. It's a little bit different. I'm sure you get this all the time being here in the Valley. It's a different dynamic in the Valley. And so taking advantage of opportunities like this to network and learn the specific speak here and how we dress and what kind of socks we wear.
The sock
It's
game.
different.
Yeah,
Pretty.
the sock
Yeah,
game.
Yeah, there you go.
Cool socks.
Good sock game.
All right. Yeah, I think we still have some time for questions, so we're going to open that up. Yeah, let's see. All right, I'll start with you.
I think she could come.
What? Oh, or you with the mic. That's the tool of power. Go for it.
My name is Dalal Worden. I'm a senior marketing manager at Hewlett Packard Enterprise. Recruited through a program called the Consortium for Graduate Study in Management. And also, Mr. Wright, I met you about 2 weeks ago. So I know both Intel, HP are doing an excellent job in terms of growing the pipeline, not only at the undergrad level, but also the MBA grad school level. And then you made comments regarding mid-level management and making sure that those people are being mentored. But with regard to Ms. Johnson's comment, you said that you're here today and then you're flying to New Orleans for the National Black MBA Conference. Given that's the dynamic for senior leaders where there are only a handful of them in order to provide mentorship program or mentoring for senior or mid-level management, how can you continue to grow those types of programs so that in the future it's not the same 3 people that are always being called upon to be on a panel, and it's not necessary for you to have to be in 2 different time zones within the same week? Thank you. Absolutely.
Great question. Excellent question. actually, you see my successor sitting here on this front row. Victoria Lambert, raise your hand. Okay, wave. She's on my team. Okay, and AT&T puts their money where their mouth is. Okay, so when they said they want to invest in diversity and inclusion, they built a team of us that can go get that done. We are very, very proud of our leadership development programs at AT&T, which looks at students at that graduate level. We have several tracks that someone at the master's level can go into. So we have our financial leadership development program where we actually hire a lot of people from consortium, so we're very familiar with the place that you were a part of. We have our marketing leadership development program. We have our HR leadership development program. So we take and hire people out of graduate school into one of our leadership development programs. And yes, they do become the bench of mid-level managers that can then go into the C-suite. So there's a huge investment in AT&T in our leadership development programs to develop that next layer of leadership. Because I know I look young, but I'm actually very old. And so I know I will not be around for a very long time. And we need the Victoria Lamberts of the world to be right behind us, succeeding us to fill our shoes very, very soon. Great question.
Yeah.
Over
Other questions?
here?
Over here? Over here?
I got it. Okay. First, thank you for taking the time to come here. Really appreciate your efforts. It's great to hear that CEOs of companies are making great statements about how things should be. Zuckerberg's, Cook's, they're making these great statements. And Brian, what you mentioned earlier was let's see how you put it. What gets measured gets done, but they've been measuring and nothing's getting done. Over the past couple of years, we can see there's very little change. So is there something within HP, Intel, AT&T that you're doing to drive the point down to make it more of a, say, a financial incentive for people to hit these goals?
Yeah, great question. I know you want to talk to that as well because Brian Krasanish really set the bar very high at Intel with that as well. What gets measured gets done. Most tech companies, while they have been embracing diversity, have not yet tied it to financial incentives the way that really is necessary to incentivize change. And so we're going down that path now. I hope my leaders know it's coming. They're MBOs for this next year. But I truly think those companies that make the most progress are those who not only have a culture of inclusion, but tie it to incentive in the same way those senior leaders have to meet goals of production around profit and loss, around there are other people commitments, diversity and inclusion. In order to be completely successful, has to be a measure there. I think we get sometimes a little too caught up in the numbers. The numbers are very important. You have to have an aspirational North Star. More important to me is those systems to create that environment of inclusion. If you do it the right way, the numbers follow. But to your point, I completely agree. It has to be incentivized and tied to the financial bottom line.
At Intel, we have something called APBs, annual performance bonuses. When BK mentioned that our 2020 goal was full representation of the available workforce, he has tied the APB and percentage of his paycheck, the boards, MCM, which is our senior management, and all the way down through the corporation on achieving these numbers. I don't know of many other companies that are doing that. And if we're the first, great. I hope that we're certainly not going to be the last ones. And also producing our numbers every year or twice a year, every 6 months. Full transparency. That is hard sometimes because the progress, we want it to be quick. We want it to be swift. We want these things to be erased. We want generations and centuries of racism and sexism to be eradicated in the next 45 days. That part's not going to happen, which is back to the putting our money where our mouth is and creating the scoreboard as well as the draft boards to make a change.
Can I add one more point? I think it's a fair question to say we've been looking at the numbers and the needle hasn't moved. What a wonderful thing it is that we can look at the numbers now that in a way we couldn't. So Intel has long been transparent about their numbers. Hewlett-Packard has been as well. Cisco as well. In the pure tech sector, AT&T. But it wasn't until Reverend Jackson came to the Valley in 2014, and all kudos to Reverend Jackson, because sunlight's a powerful disinfectant. And so wonderful that push caused companies like Google and the ripple effect of others to begin to measure, because we couldn't have even said that 2 years ago, hey, the needle isn't moving, because nobody was showing you where their needle was. And so while we know we've got work to do, we're heading in the right direction. I'm quite confident.
Absolutely. I mean, at AT&T, the needle is moving. And we also are very, very transparent with our dashboard. Very proud of the progress we're making, but still feel that there are many miles before we sleep. So nobody sleep. We're wide awake at AT&T. But yeah, we stay woke at AT&T. But absolutely, absolutely, we stay woke. Absolutely. But not only do we have internal measures of success and also have goals, we don't have quotas, we have goals that are tied to our diversity and inclusion things, but we are also proud of the fact that we are measured externally. So Diversity Inc., as I mentioned earlier, not only rated us #1 as it related to ERG groups, but also named us #1 as it related to our recruiting efforts, named us overall, we moved from #7 to #4 in overall diversity, okay? So again, that speaks volumes to not only is the work that we're doing something that we can look at internally and our employees feel it, and we know they feel it through our ENPS scores, our employee net promoter scores, employees who actually promote AT&T as a great place to work, employees who actually want their friends and family to work for AT&T and would invite their friends and family to buy AT&T's products and services, okay? So we measure it that way also. So not only do we have those internal measures, but to have external companies look at us and say, you're the model, you are definitely moving the needle. We're very proud of that.
All right, we have time for one more.
Hi, my name is Carlos Haddix. I'm the Global Diversity Talent Acquisition Partner at VMware. So for all you students from HBCU, talk to me. You mentioned earlier that the DOL had a lawsuit for a company, and I did research on the DOL, and they have several lawsuits going on, Tyson Foods being one of them. And you mentioned earlier about being very intentional about getting people on the board. With OFCC compliance for companies who have federal contracts, they mentioned that you have to have an affirmative action in place, and sometimes that's a quote unquote, a dirty phrase to be used. How do you kind of suggest for companies who are, federal contractors who have to abide by OFCC compliance to use that to be more intentional about their recruitment process? Because one thing that they try to tell you is do not be discriminatory in how you recruit. So one thing that your legal team will probably tell you is, well, you can't go into HBCUs and recruit specifically just only for black people, or go into like a school like, Harvard or so and just only recruit for white people. So there's contradicting thoughts around that. Whereas, if you want to quote unquote move the needle, as they keep saying, you have to go in those places to get that demographic. But the question was, how would you push utilizing OFCC compliance laws to have a more direct affirmative action policy in place?
That's a very technical question. That's a good question. He referenced the acronym OFCCP. It's the Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs. Any company that does business in the United States with a certain number of employees, whether they have federal contracts or not, are required to meet certain affirmative action goals. That's really the tick-the-box compliance. Right. The rules are a bit antiquated because it's based on sites. It's not saying how is AT&T doing in the U.S. It's how is AT&T in Boise, Idaho in Building 12 meeting requirements of enough women and ethnic minorities in positions of leadership. All too often, and this is very technical stuff we could follow up afterwards, all too often the compliance piece is done in a different side of the company than the typical HR diversity and inclusion. I think the best advice would be to combine the two together.
Absolutely.
To use compliance as a threshold. We must do this in order to not run afoul of potential business or be fined, right? Because you will be fined by the government if you don't meet those requirements. But to go beyond, it's minimum level of competence, right? So to tie your broader diversity goals to your compliance goals is one thing. But then also, to Gail's point, is casting a broad net, right? It's about, I'm here today, Amy from my team just came back from Out and Equal, the largest LGBT advocacy organization event in Orlando. Jesse from the team's at the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce event in Miami right now. We could all say the same things. It's casting a broad net, not focusing too much on one constituency, but being able to focus deep on each constituency and telling the government about that we're casting this broad net. Is that helpful?
Absolutely. I mean, within AT&T, we talk about the power of and it is truly the power of and. It's HBCU and women colleges. It's women colleges and minority-serving colleges. It's minority-serving colleges and looking for bilingual students, okay? So there's not a constituency out there, veterans, that can say that, you know, AT&T is very narrowly focused. We are looking for the best talent that we can find. And we know that that doesn't fall into one category or two categories or five categories. So we're constantly out there looking for, OFCCP compliance is just the floor. You know, that's where we start. But I mean, I've been with the company now for 29 years. I've never seen us rest on our laurels and be happy that we passed an OFCC compliant audit. We are supposed to pass an OFCC compliance audit. That's nothing to brag about. You didn't hear me talking about our OFCC audit because we're supposed to do that. So we go above and beyond and have always gone above and beyond.
All right, that's all the time we have. But yeah, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you.